66% of people sleep with their mouth open. And mouth breathing is the number one cause of cavities because of the effect that it has on the saliva and the protective mechanisms of saliva. The other thing that makes us more prone to is issues such as snoring or apnea.
Today's guest is Sachin Patel, who is the first guest I've ever brought back for a round two. I was also hoping to have him teach us a few more breathing techniques. He did teach us a couple on the previous podcast.
The number 3 cause of divorce is actually snoring. So a lot of relationships can be spared or saved by teaching people how to breathe correctly at night, but it's just part of the spectrum of dysfunctional breathing, and snoring and apnea are on the severe end of dysfunctional breathing. A lot of that can be resolved by...
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Hi, and welcome to the next episode of the Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity Podcast. Today's guest is Sachin Patel, who is the first guest I've ever brought back for a round two. I had so many pre-prepared leftover questions from our first recording and so many additional questions that cropped up during our recording that I wanted to have him back, and he graciously agreed. I was also hoping to have him teach us a few more breathing techniques. He did teach us a couple on the previous podcast. Make sure you go back and check that out. Sachin Patel led a breathwork session at a Mindshare event that I attended. In fact, he has run many breathwork sessions. He is a doctor of chiropractic and has been delivering value to patients with his mindset, the doctor of the future is the patient. On top of that, he mentors other healthcare providers to grow their impact in their communities. There is so much to learn from him, and I am excited to jump in. Sachin, thank you for joining us again today.
Chris, it's my absolute honor, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Thank you for having me back.
Awesome. So in our first interview, we talked about how you ended up in the health space, which interestingly involved a Porsche. And we talked about you building hospitals, schools, dormitories, and even more in Uganda, which is amazing. We spoke about how you are delivering value to patients through your practice in Canada. And actually, we're going to dig more into that today, and how you started and why you started focusing on breath. You did share 2 breathing techniques that you could use at a stoplight, which you kind of define a stoplight as being an anchor or a prompt. We'll talk a little bit more about that. One technique you taught us was a way to manage anxiety. The other you describe as the best way to breathe throughout the day, period. Again, if you're listening and watching this, you need to go back and check out that previous podcast. Also, make sure you subscribe and follow it. Click that notification bell. We'll throw that in there. Let's do a quick recap. Why is breathing so important, and how do you see breathing related to longevity?
Yeah, so great question, and a loaded question, so I'll try to keep it short. Breathing is important because it helps us eliminate toxicity, specifically in this case, CO2, and it helps us move lymph, which helps remove toxicity from our body and move toxicity from our body. And it also helps us circulate. So it assists the heart in circulating blood throughout the system. And, our diaphragm plays a very important role in our emotions, and our lungs play a very important role in managing and processing and releasing grief. So there's a lot of kind of physical reasons we breathe. There's spiritual reasons we breathe. There's, biochemical reasons that we breathe. And it's something that we can't not do for more than just a few minutes, and expect to survive. So it's actually one of the most crucial things that we do. And because everyone does it, everyone listening to this is probably breathing right now. We take it for granted. So it's one of those things that we don't really give much attention to, unfortunately. However, is very, very closely connected to many aspects of our health. And specifically when it comes to longevity, the greatest predictor of lifespan is lung capacity, which makes sense because shortly after you stop breathing is when people transition. So we there's a close correlation between our ability to breathe and how long we can expect to live.
So I often talk about sleep because it's one of the kind of key testimonials related to my product. And I describe sleep as improving, having a positive impact on your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. And you just covered all those three. How do you see kind of sleep and breathing intertwined if you do see them intertwined?
Well, I think one of the things that we may have touched on last time is how sleep is or how breath rather is the steering wheel of the nervous system. And with the breath that we choose, we get to choose the state that we want to be in. And the most parasympathetic thing that we do is breathing. Or I'm sorry, the most parasympathetic thing that we do is sleeping. And sleeping is something that allows us to heal, to recover, to regenerate. And it's something that literally tens of millions of Americans and Canadians struggle with each and every single night. It's when we repair and regenerate ourselves. However, if we are breathing dysfunctionally while we're sleeping, that can create dysfunctional repair and recovery for people. So we like to encourage people to use their breath to shift into a parasympathetic state so they get better sleep. We also like to encourage people to be mindful of how they breathe while they're sleeping. So an encouragement that we offer is using something like mouth tape to keep our mouths closed while we breathe at night so we can breathe exclusively through our noses. And this helps with a variety of different factors, but one of them is that it helps us with rest, recovery, and rejuvenation.
They can be intertwined, and actually, if you're struggling with sleep, you can use breath work to really facilitate sleep. So I think that's really important. And yeah, they're both good for your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Kind of in that previous question, I mentioned stopping at a stoplight and that being an anchor or a prompt. Talk a little bit about this. Why does that concept even come up when you're thinking about breath or breath work?
Yeah. So, there's four levels of competency. One is unconscious incompetency, which is the state that most people are in. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't know that they don't know.
Mm.
And so we have to take people into the next level of awareness, which is conscious incompetency. So now they know they don't know. And then there's conscious competency, which is doing something with the awareness that you're doing it. And then there's unconscious competency, which is something that we do without even thinking about it. So when it comes to our breath, many of us are unconsciously incompetent when it comes to breathing. And we just want to shift people into those various stages. Now, the key with habit change is really a three-step formula. And this was developed by BJ Fogg, who's a professor at Stanford. And he wrote a book called Tiny Habits. And one day, BJ and I were having breakfast, and he's like, "Man, you've really helped me out in my life." And I'm like, "Really? Like, that's pretty cool that I've helped you." So he's helped me in a profound way in the sense that he's taught me how to think about habit change and habit formation. So there's three things that are required when it comes to habit change. The first thing that we need the motivation to change. So we have to be, inspired to make some changes about whatever it is that we want to change. The second thing is ability. So do we actually have the capability of making changes? And the third thing is a prompt. So a prompt is basically where we're able to identify something in our environment that reminds us of something else. So for me, my prompt to breathe and to go inwards with my breath and focus on it and bring it to my attention is every time I think of my phone. So every time I think of my phone, I'm going to think of my breath next. So we find something that we do frequently and then anchor our breath to it or whatever habit we're trying to change. The other thing that might come up for people is if you drive a lot, if you spend a lot of time in the car, or even when you're driving, it doesn't even matter how much time you spend. But every time you come into a red light, that could be an opportunity for you to check in with your breath, right? So motivation, ability, and the third thing is the prompt. Once we identify what that prompt is, then we can start anchoring behavior change into our daily routine. And we could do this with anything. It doesn't have to just be with breath. We could do it with our thoughts, right? We could steer our thoughts in the right direction. Every time BJ, for example, every time he goes to the bathroom, he does 5 push-ups. He just does them standing up next to the sink. So that's, his anchor is going to the bathroom. And then that's what prompts him to participate in that physical behavior. So it could be with anything that we want to become better at.
Yeah, so I like that. You need the motivation, the ability, and then something that'll trigger that thing. That makes a lot of sense. And I like the concept in what we mentioned in the previous podcast was at a stoplight is a good time to like, hey, don't reach for your phone. A lot of people these days are reaching for your phone, so I'm using my horn more these days than I used to have to. In Houston, it's interesting. People tend not to use their horn in Houston, which I like a lot, but that is going to be changing if people are on their phones. All right. So you, in some, when I was doing research for this interview, you talk about a 10-second body scan. And I don't remember where you spoke about it, but do you remember the details of that 10-second body scan? And could you walk us through that?
Yeah, I'll have to go off memory, but basically it's a scan, and you could create your own 10-second body scan where we're identifying key things that we want to pay attention to. One of them is checking in with our breath, right? And if we just go from head to toe, we could easily kind of create our head to toe 10-second scan or a 10 prompt scan. So for me, one of the things I want to scan in on is, where's my mind at, right? And am I using my brain and my thoughts as a force for good, right? So that's kind of check-in number one. Next check-in right underneath is my nose. How's my breath? Am I breathing in accordance to what I'm trying to accomplish? So if I'm checking emails, am I breathing in a coherence pattern? If I'm at the gym, am I breathing in a pattern that's going to allow my body to perform at its maximum or to the degree that I want it to? So I'm checking in with my breath. Next, I'm checking with my words. So, am I speaking my truth, right? And am I connecting with other people with my voice and vocalizing myself to others? Next is my heart, right? Am I doing something that I love right now, right? Or is something that I'm doing right now moving me closer towards doing something that I love? And so that gives me a sense of purpose, okay? The next thing is digestion, right? So I'm checking in with, am I eating in accordance to my goals and objectives? Or what's the last meal I had? When's the next meal I should be having? So just checking in there, making sure I have enough sustenance. And then just going down, the next one is our pelvis. So in my pelvis, I'm looking for stability, right? And do I feel stable in what I'm doing right now? Do I feel grounded, and do I feel present? And then of course, our creative energy is in our root chakra, right? Do I feel tapped in, and do I feel aligned? So just, that gives me like a quick 10-second scan to check in with myself and ensure that, I'm doing things that are in alignment with my greater self and my greater good.
I like that. And then you're able to kind of use that just like, hey, maybe there's a breath technique that I could use to kind of create balance, or maybe there isn't balance. I think any time that we're understanding ways to analyze ourselves is really valuable. Now I want to change gears a little more like kind of very sciencey. I understand we can impact nitric oxide with different breathing techniques. What is the value of nitric oxide? Why is it important? And do you have any tips regarding nitric oxide and breathing techniques related to it?
Yeah, sure. So nitric oxide is a very interesting molecule because it has multiple purposes in the body, like most molecules do. Their body's pretty ingeniously designed in such a way that it doesn't need a lot of different things, because one molecule can do many different things and have a pleomorphic effect on the body. So nitric oxide specifically is a molecule that helps with aiding our immune health. One of the things that it does is it kills viruses and bacteria and pathogens on contact. So our nasal mucosa makes nitric oxide, assuming we have a healthy oral microbiome and that we breathe correctly, because that acts as our initial defense against the outside world. So nitric oxide kills pathogens before they enter into our lungs. Another thing nitric oxide does is it dilates blood vessels. So by dilating blood vessels, it allows blood to flow through the body more effectively, and it promotes microcirculation. And microcirculation is important to the brain, but also to our reproductive organs. And this is where you'll oftentimes see metabolic dysfunction first. So there's more and more men these days, and I'm sure women to a certain degree, but men specifically are struggling with sexual dysfunction, and specifically erectile dysfunction, which is one of the first signs of metabolic dysfunction. And it can come long before diabetes, it can come long before heart disease and cognitive decline. But we see that in men more and more, and younger, unfortunately. And a lot of times it's actually because they're not making enough nitric oxide. And so when we increase nitric oxide, we increase microcirculation, and thereby increase blood flow, repair, regenerative properties increase as well. and we also lower blood pressure. So there's a kind of a multitude of benefits that nitric oxide provides our body with. It's easy to measure. So you can actually take an oral nitric oxide test strip, place it on your tongue for 10 seconds, and then basically there's two pads that you squeeze together. And in 10 seconds, you'll know what your nitric oxide levels are. So it's pretty easy to test, and it's pretty easy to increase as well. So first things first, we want to do things that do not deplete nitric oxide levels. So one of those things is mouth breathing. Mouth breathing destroys nitric oxide producing bacteria in the mouth because it dries out our saliva. Secondly, smoking, so cigarettes, things like that, and vaping will also kind of dry out our mouth and disrupt the oral microbiome. The third thing is mouthwash. Mouthwash also destroys our oral microbiome, and it's amazing how many people have hypertension and are never told by their doctors to stop using mouthwash. Mouthwash is very closely correlated with increasing hypertension. And interestingly enough, during COVID, all the experts were telling people to use mouthwash after they were around people in public to kill any bacteria. But that makes no sense because your nose already does that if you breathe correctly. And by using mouthwash, you're killing the bacteria that helps you make that defense system. And you're raising blood pressure. And hypertension was a number one comorbidity of hospitalizations with people with COVID. So it's just kind of one of those things that if we only knew better. So how do we then increase nitric oxide? Well, sunlight is one of the fastest ways to increase nitric oxide. So getting outside and letting the sun hit your skin. The other way to increase nitric oxide is to breathe through your nose. So breathing through your nose will increase nitric oxide production 6-fold. And then humming will increase nitric oxide 15-fold. Certain foods will also have nitric oxide precursors, and some of those foods would include things like arugula and beets. Greens generally contain compounds in them, nitrates that will increase our own production of nitric oxide. And so eating the right foods in a balance as part of a balanced diet is also going to be crucial for nitric oxide production. And then, I think a big thing is like really everything I described that increases nitric oxide is part of the formula for just general health, right? Another thing that increases nitric oxide production too, systemically, is movement. So exercising and moving your big muscle groups in your body. There's actually specific exercises you can do like squats, jumping jacks, shoulder raises, these type of movements, because you're utilizing such large muscle groups, these will also increase nitric oxide as well.
Okay. So, you just mentioned that breathing in through your nose increases nitric oxide. It's also healthier to breathe through your nose. Is it just that nitric oxide, or are there other kind of components going versus mouth and then nose breathing?
Yep. So good question. So our nose is actually specifically designed to be an intake. So think of the intake on a car. The bigger the intake, the more power the engine can produce, right? The more concentrated and more pressurized the air coming in is, like a turbo pressurizes the air. The more pressurized the air is, the more oxygen can be delivered. And so when we breathe through our nose, we pressurize the air, we moisture regulate the air, we temperature regulate the air, and we purify the air. So we essentially perfect the air so that our lungs can absorb the most amount of oxygen possible. When we breathe through our nose, because of the pressurization that takes place, it's always going to feel slower. So it's always going to feel more resistive to breathe through our nose. And that's normal because our mouth is obviously a much bigger hole. But breathing through our nose intentionally is pressurizing the air, which increases oxygen absorption by about 20%. So we actually get 20% more efficiency in our breath by breathing through our nose versus breathing through our mouth.
If you're training, as you train harder and more vigorously, you tend to switch to your mouth. Should you be trying to breathe through your nose as long as possible? Is there some sort of transition? And also, I think you've mentioned at some point, breath for training or vigorous exercise. Talk about that a little bit, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So remember, our nervous system always uses our breathing as a way of assisting the physical body. So when we're in an intense bout of exercise, so for sprinting, for example, you don't want to breathe slow and through your nose, because what you actually want is you want to create as much blood pressure as you can to pump blood to your arms and legs, right? We need to get blood all the way to the tips of our fingers and our toes if we're going to run away from whatever's chasing us. So if I'm breathing slow, or if I'm barely breathing, let's say like I'm breathing in a meditative state or in a 6 in, 6 out state, I'm actually not physically assisting my heart in pumping blood. I'm actually hindering it from pumping blood. Whereas if I'm breathing very intensely for a short period of time, because usually if you're in a sprint, an all-out sprint or fight, it's going to be very short-lived, that's okay. We just don't want to be breathing like that or in that pattern, breathing through your mouth, short, shallow breathing throughout the rest of the day. That's okay to breathe temporarily in that fashion. So I like to think of breathing in 3 different gears. The first gear is at rest, or as you start increasing your exercise response, we would breathe in and out through the nose. So we start off our baseline breathing that I'm coming back to even in between my reps at the gym is 6 in, 6 out. Okay. So I'm trying to recover between each set where I'm breathing all the way back to that baseline form of breathing. And then the next layer of breathing would be to increase my respiratory rate. So I can go from 6 in, 6 out to 4 in, 4 out, 2 in, 2 out, right? 1 in, 1 out. And then when I can't maintain nasal breathing anymore, then I'm going to breathe in through my nose and out through my mouth. In through my nose, out through my mouth. That's what we call gear number 2. And then gear number 3 is in and out through my mouth. So that would be my breathing technique in an all-out sprint. And so if I'm maximally exerting myself and then I'm trying to go back to recovery mode, I'm going to gear down. So I'm going to go mouth in and out through the mouth, then in through the nose, out through the mouth, and then back down to in and out through the nose, and then slowing down to 6 in, 6 out. So I'm just kind of gearing up and gearing down. Now, what they say is that when you're not able to maintain nasal breathing anymore, you've kind of exceeded your metabolic capacity. So once you go into, forcefully breathing in and out through your mouth, you're kind of in an anaerobic state at that point.
Yeah, which for me recently, kind of balancing and managing being in an anaerobic state versus just being in a fat burning mode has been a challenge and very interesting. I had this understanding that, we've got fight or flight, right? So we got parasympathetic, sympathetic. My understanding was like those kick up cortisol, those kick up adrenaline, and that typically we run those off. Like it's important to actually burn those off, right? Because typically when those happen, as we're kind of on the plains of Africa or wherever we are, it's a lion. And at the same point that we're getting this spike, this movement into the parasympathetic mode, that we're actually have it physically exerting, right? Because there's very rare situations on the plains of Africa where you've got stress and you're not running. And then now we have the challenge of, well, a phone call can be stressful and our body doesn't know the difference between a phone call and a lion or an email or whatever. So we still get this cortisol spike, but we're not typically burning it off. You may have mentioned at some point that there's a lot of some of the things that are happening are actually the breath that are controlling them. How do you sit in that space where we've got this stress response and then, my thinking is we need to burn it off. Maybe we don't. Maybe we just need the right breathing technique.
Well, I'm always going to encourage movement because that's one of the best ways to get outside, get some fresh air, release that energy that builds up, right? Kind of burn through that cortisol and adrenaline.
Get some nitric oxide from the sun. Yeah.
Yeah, get some nitric oxide from the sun, and even just walking will increase nitric oxide a bit. So I think that's always a good way to reset the body. But if we're looking at it from a breathing standpoint, then I think we discussed it last time, but a simple technique called a physiologic sigh is a great way to take you from that sympathetic dominant fight or flight state and shift you into a more parasympathetic state. So I feel like you want to use anything that you can to kind of release that stress, that physical stress, that biochemical stress rather, that is the biology of physically moving your body. You want to release it by physically moving your body if you can help it. And then in combination with that, you can use a physiologic sigh to shift gears. And then again, using your breath as a steering wheel of your nervous system, shift into releasing into a more 6 in, 6 out coherence breathing technique.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. we'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
I love the concreteness of this. So there's so many things that we can talk about, and there's N of one. But when you speak about kind of different breathing techniques, it's like you push the button and this happens. Like these are just non-negotiables. We don't really even have to have. I mean, there may be some extreme outliers, but we're just talking. This works for everyone. Mouth tape is something that I think we discussed it last time briefly. How important do you see mouth tape is for sleepers? And maybe kind of a step back, what percentage of people kind of naturally breathe through their mouth, through their nose? Maybe you know that. And then does that change when you're sleeping? And then also what's that benefit of taping the mouth closed?
Yeah, great question. So 50% of people statistically are habitual mouth breathers. And, one of the things that you pay attention, or that I pay attention to, is how people, as a chiropractor, I used to pay attention to people's gait and how they walk.
Mm-hmm.
And, now I pay attention to how they breathe, because that tells me the state of their nervous system without them saying a single word. And so my wife and I were kind of perplexed, and we were wondering, is it true that about 50% of people breathe through their mouth? Like, that sounds a little bit high, because when you're in conversations with people, or, just when you're observing individuals, it doesn't seem that high. But as soon as people start exerting themselves, that's when they start becoming, mouth breathers in orders of magnitude compared to when they're at rest. So one day, my wife and I were downtown in Toronto, and we were just kind of observing, as everyone would walk by, we would just observe, are they breathing through their nose or breathing through their mouth? And I would say about 90% of people were breathing through their mouth, and they were just walking. They weren't sprinting. There was like no metabolic reason for them to be breathing through their mouth, but they just didn't have the awareness of breathing through their nose versus breathing through their mouth. So they just kind of default to where the path of least resistance is. Statistically, 66% of people sleep with their mouth open. And the significance of that is that there's multiple significances of that, but one of them is that when we breathe through our nose, we actually pressurize the air, we cleanse the air, we moisture regulate the air. And when we breathe through our nose, it's actually an antidiuretic. So we're less likely to wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. When we breathe through our mouth, on the other hand, we're drying out our oral saliva. So now our mouth gets dried out. It makes us more prone to cavities. In fact, mouth breathing is the number one cause of cavities because of the effect that it has on the saliva and the protective mechanisms of saliva. We also put our tongue falls in the bottom of our mouth, and that makes us more sympathetic versus being parasympathetic when our tongue is in the roof of our mouth. The other thing that makes us more prone to is issues such as snoring or apnea. Our tongue can have the tendency to fall back into our throat, and that can result in a restricted airway, which can cause snoring, or in some cases, complete stoppage of breathing, which is apnea. And interestingly enough, Chris, maybe you knew this, is that the number 3 cause of divorce is actually snoring. So a lot of relationships can be spared or saved by teaching people how to breathe correctly at night. And when people think of breathing, they don't think of snoring as breathing. It's like almost like its own separate category of health intervention because it happens at night. But it's just part of the spectrum of dysfunctional breathing, and snoring and apnea are on the severe end of dysfunctional breathing. But a lot of that can be resolved by mouth taping and some really simple oral and tongue and swallowing exercises that we prescribe to people.
Okay, so I wasn't even really aware of it, although it makes sense. So just taping your mouth can have a positive impact on your snoring, like just that it could be that simple. That's pretty amazing. It's just a little piece of tape. And then some people have a little fear of potentially having tape on their mouth. Like, have you ever had to address that? And how would you speak to those people?
Yeah, so there's actually a few solutions for that. So first of all is how we tape. So we just place a piece of tape vertically like this, and we're using 3M micropore tape. So it's a surgical tape. It's very inexpensive. You can get a pack of 12 from Amazon for $10. It'll last you more than a year. So it's a very inexpensive intervention. The other thing that we recommend to people is something called myotape. So if you don't want anything going across your lips, there's a tape that you can get that goes around your mouth, and you could use that for children as well. And myotape essentially allows us to have full access to our mouth if we want to talk or drink. but it keeps our mouth closed when our jaw is relaxed. So while we're sleeping, our mouth doesn't fall open. And the third option for some people might be a chin strap, where you kind of put a strap around your chin and it goes across the top of your head, and that keeps your jaw in a closed position while you sleep. So there are alternatives for people who might be claustrophobic or people who don't want to put tape across their mouth or over their mouth.
Okay, excellent. So when I think about breathing, I often kind of immediately think about yoga and fascia maneuvers and meditation. How do you see an overlap of those types of things? Like, is there an overlap? What do you think the overlap is?
Yeah, I mean, the word yoga means union. And yoga is actually not about, most people don't know this, but yoga is actually not even about the flows. Yoga is a way of life. And so the movements that people do, the exercise component of yoga is actually is only one component of yoga. The other thing for people to realize is that where yoga means union, and the reason it's so focused on the breath is because focusing on our breath is what brings that union with ourself. So yoga is actually more about breath than it is about the body postures. By going into those body postures and then breathing correctly, you're able to essentially access and unite with different parts of your body. So one of the yoga flows that I do is called sun salutations. And sun salutations at first is all about getting in the right postures. But somebody who's then evolved into knowing the postures and the positions, then the focus becomes the breath. And the breath is where the therapeutic benefit takes place, because you're putting your body in different positions, and then you're expanding and contracting your lungs and moving your diaphragm in different positions as well, to release that fascia. So you're allowing fascial flow to take place. You're allowing the lymphatics to move. And then you're also, getting stimulation of your trunk organs as well as your diaphragm moves up and down in different positions.
Yeah, I figured those were so interrelated. All right, here's a good question for you. If you were only able to use just 3 breathing techniques, what would they be and why? As you proceed through the rest of your life, you've only got 3. What would those 3 be?
Great question. So I think, spoiler alert, we've already talked about them. So one of them is coherence breathing, which is how I would breathe 99% of the day. The second one is what we've also talked about, is a physiological sigh, which is a way to shift from a extremely stressful state into a more calm state. And the third one that I would use is called bellows breath. And bellows breath is a form of rapid breathing technique that you can use to increase blood pressure, to increase cortisol and adrenaline output. So instead of having a cup of coffee in the afternoon, you could use your breath to actually increase adrenaline, give you a boost of energy without giving you the stimulation of caffeine, for example.
So we, in the previous podcast, we talked about coherence, which is really more about belly breathing. I think you said 6 in, 6 out. Is that with no pause in between? Is that correct?
Yep.
Yep.
Just a circular pattern of breathing.
And then the sigh is one deep breath. What's the count on the sigh again?
So the sigh is actually a 3-phase breath in. So tongue is at the roof of the mouth. We're breathing in through the nose, into the belly, into the lungs, and then into the top of the apex of the lungs. So we're taking a deep, super deep breath in, and then holding that for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then releasing with an audible sigh. So we would just drop the tongue, release through the mouth with an audible sigh. And then we would do that about 3 to 5 times or 3 to 5 minutes, depending on what we need at that time. And that would help us shift gears. And then bellows breath is really simple. Sometimes it's hard to demonstrate because you can't see my hands on the screen. But essentially, we're just sitting up nice and straight, hands at our side. And then we take a sharp breath of air in as we bring our hands up. And then a sharp exhale as we bring our hands down. So it's like... And awesome. So the reason this is... the reason this increases adrenaline and cortisol is it's essentially exaggerating how you would be breathing if you're running away from a lion. So you're breathing really fast, really strong, really sharp, And you can imagine that as your lungs rapidly expand and contract, and as your diaphragm rapidly moves up and down, it's going to start increasing the pressure that your heart produces. So if you do have blood pressure issues, we don't recommend this. But if you don't have any blood pressure issues and you're well regulated, then this is a great exercise that you can do to increase energy. So you could do it first thing in the morning if you're feeling a little bit groggy and you want to wake up, or you could do it in the middle of the afternoon if you're having that afternoon dip that some people have. Instead of having a cup of coffee or stimulants, you can use your breath to wake you back up again. And some people call this breathing technique yogic coffee.
Now, could you take bellows breath? So let's just say you're coming off of a heated phone call, a heated discussion or whatever. There's part of me that thinks you want to like amp up. Would it make sense to do some bellows breath for some period of time and then kind of fold into size, like combining some of these?
Yeah, I mean, it could be pretty cathartic, right? Just to kind of get that energy out of your body, getting that physical movement to get rid of some of that adrenaline that you may have built up. But and then you can probably shift into the physiologic sigh and then go into the coherence breathing. I've never tried that, but it sounds like it'd be a good practice if people are encountering bouts of stress throughout the day.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I've often kind of heard of practice box breathing and meditation. It's not one of your top three. When would we use box breath as a first question? And then is there any different as we start extending, creating the boxes bigger, so more and more seconds? Is there values to the different kind of seconds we might have for box breathing?
Yeah, so box breathing is also a great relaxation technique. For a breathing technique, it can be used in meditations. So just for everyone's benefit, box breathing usually is about a count of 4 in, you hold for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, hold empty for a count of 4, and then inhale again. And you kind of repeat that pattern for anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes, again, depending on what you need. And so one of the things that happens with box breathing is you're lengthening the exhale. So when you lengthen the exhale, you're going into a more parasympathetic state. So you're inhaling for 4, and then it's 4-second hold, 4-second exhale, and then a 4-second hold. So it's taking you, almost a total of, if you will, 12 seconds to exhale. So when we're using the box breathing technique, it's actually shifting us more into a parasympathetic state. Whereas when we're breathing in and out for 6 or in and out for 4, it's balancing us, right? We're balanced between the sympathetic and parasympathetic response. We're right on the edge there. Whereas when we start lengthening the exhale, we're getting more into a relaxed state. This is why 4-7-8 breathing, which was developed by Andrew Weil. I don't know if you can invent breathing techniques. I mean, it just seems like, but I always like to give credit where credit is due. But his breathing technique 4-7-8 is what he recommends to clients before they go to sleep. So you're inhaling for 4 and you're exhaling for a total of 15 seconds. So again, you're shifting more into that parasympathetic state. But I wouldn't want to do that technique if I'm trying to do focused work, right? Because that's going to get me too far off, drifting off into relaxation. And I want to be, if I want to be present and focused, then the 6 in, 6 out is a more appropriate breathing technique at that time.
And you said, so 4-7-8 is 4 in. What's the 7 and 8? Because apparently they're very similar, or this
So
maybe
it's
there's a pause.
4 seconds in, 7-second hold, 8-second exhale.
Okay. That makes sense. So in your practice, you focus on mastering your metabolism. We believe my product impacts the mitochondria. How interrelated do you see metabolism and mitochondrial function? And I know this is off of breathing, but this is a kind of germane to your practice, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So, metabolic health, obviously, the engine of our metabolic system is the mitochondria, which is in virtually every cell in our body, of course, except the red blood cells. And so we need healthy mitochondrial function in order for our electrons to help us make energy. Our food is eventually turned into electrons to help us make energy and power the systems in our body. And of course, we need breath to provide the oxygen for the reactions in the mitochondria. So, we look at metabolism as how everything is working, right? And of course, the mitochondria is a powerhouse of the cells, powering the process, right? Powering the software and the hardware to do the job that it's designed to do.
Okay. And so a lot of your practice, when you start getting into mitochondria, you have breathing as a tool. I'm assuming it's nutrition, it's movement, it's all of the things related to kind of overall well-being.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
as many people know, our mitochondria produce light, and they receive light. So circadian biology is a big aspect of the services we offer. We encourage people to get outside more, right? Get free electrons from the earth, even touching a tree, grounding yourself, using a grounding mat, which is what I have on my desk. Grounding sheets can be something that people use, or even throws or blankets in their bedrooms or TV rooms, at their desk. So the goal, what we try to teach people is how to go back to the basics. How do we become human again, right? We've kind of become dehumanized in this, culture where everything is all about comfort. And as a result of that, we don't really stimulate our mitochondria very well. So I take cold showers, I go in the sauna, I do cold exposure, depending on your mitochondrial ancestry. Sunlight is more valuable for you. For some people, cold is more valuable to stimulate the mitochondria. So it just depends on how your mitochondria are coupled. We try to get, like I said, free electrons from wherever we can get them. We try to optimize digestion so that we can get as much extraction from our food as possible for the vitamins, minerals, proteins, and carbohydrates and healthy fats. We also make sure people are breathing correctly. We make sure they're sleeping correctly. We make sure they're tracking their outcomes. We use an Aura ring to do that with them. We help them learn how to manage their mindset and, healthy relationships and communication. Those are big parts of what we teach our clients. And, our focus is really getting them into a more parasympathetic state, or more balanced state, from a autonomic nervous system standpoint, because that's when we show up as our best self. If you're running around in fight or flight, no matter how successful you are, or happy you think you are, or healthy you think you are, the healthiest version of you is on the version of you that's more parasympathetic. And so we try to shift people's autonomic nervous system state so they're in a more of a regenerative state when it comes to their healing and repair.
And that's you do all of these things at the Living Proof Institute, right? That's
Yep. So at the Living Proof Institute, we actually have a program called Living Light, and that's a program we license to hundreds of practices all over the world now, and we teach it to practitioners to incorporate into their practices because it just works so well. I mean, we're providing the body with the correct inputs that it needs for it to thrive, and when we provide it with what it needs, it does what it knows exactly how to do, which is heal, repair, and regenerate.
Excellent. I love that we can be having a conversation with people who help other practitioners delivering more value, because that's, you go to the kind of the root source, like you probably teach to go to the root cause. Going to the root source of the information is great. You have a mantra about feeling better short term and long term. What is that mantra? And maybe I don't remember where I found it.
Okay, so I think I know what you're referring to. So there's a big movement towards longevity these days, and while everyone wants to live longer, that's a very forward and future facing problem. And while I want to live as long as I can, I'm sure Chris, you want to live as long as you can. We all have a lot of we have a lot of work to do while we're here, but we also have a lot to live for and a lot to be happy for. However, what I feel is missing this day and age is presence. So it's good to have a long-term health strategy, but I think it's more important to have a strategy that brings you more present to each moment of each day, because I believe that you can live 50 lifetimes if you just learn how to be present instead of living in the past or living too much into the future. And so my focus in my practice and really my teachings and breath is a perfect example of that, is how do I bring people into this moment, into this now, because the now is really all we have, right? Eckhart Tolle talks about this. The ancients talked about this. Ram Dass talked about this. His guru Neem Karoli talked about this, right? That all we have is this moment. And we're so distracted these days. And that's actually destroying our quality of life, because it's taking us away from this actual moment. And, one of the things I believe is that every lesson that we need to learn is being offered to us in this moment if we can be present to it. And the fastest way to bring our presence to this moment is to bring our presence and our awareness to our breath.
What a good focus in this kind of, hyper dopamine hit, social media, cell phone all the time kind of environment that we're in. I think that's amazing. Well, once again, we've ran out of time. I feel like we got almost all of what I wanted to cover in the first interview. So again, thank you so much for joining us. For those who are interested, what are the best ways to potentially contact you, maybe catch you doing some breath work or get in touch with you in general?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So they can go to breathworkwithsachin.com if they want more tools and resources related to breathing. If people want to learn more about our metabolic program, they can go to mymetabolicreset.ca, and that outlines exactly how our programs work and how we help people. And then you can always follow me on Facebook. I'm at Sachin Patel, DC. You can follow me there, and that's where I share the unfiltered truth as long as Facebook allows me to.
which can be a challenge. And then I asked this question less than a month ago, so maybe it's still the same answer. But what in the near future are you excited about?
Oh, thanks for asking. So for me, I'm really excited about 2025. I think there's been like I don't know if it's the election, but I don't get into politics too much, but I think that was like a turning point for a lot of people in the sense that, there's just this air of positivity when it comes to health. And I feel like the censorship is starting to go away. And I feel like we're going to be able to speak the truth again without being punished for it. And I feel like there's just a massive tailwind that I feel is coming our way. So I'm just trying to tap into it as best I can. And the thing that I'm most excited about is continuing to educate practitioners and licensing our systems to them.
Okay, awesome. So you can find some of his breathwork with Sachin. That's SACHIN.com. And then mymetabolicreset.ca. That is a Canadian address, but you help people throughout the world, I would imagine. Yes?
Yeah, mymetabolicreset.com was already taken. So we went with .ca. And pretty soon it'll be Living Light Reset. But for now, My Metabolic Reset will take them exactly where they need to go.
Awesome. And then on social media at Sachin Patel, DC. Sachin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. It's my absolute honor. And here's to health, happiness, and wholeness to all.
Love it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.